this incredible change of strategy, really, that's going to be happening in Australia. Are you surprised by the size of this move?
A little bit, yes. What's striking that Australia has made a pretty big transition. The United States has been, since the famous pivot toward Asia, has been trying to move more toward Asia. It's obviously had difficulties. Now we have the Ukraine war, but it is striking to me that Australia has made such a dramatic change. They had prospered very well by essentially being kind of a piece of the Chinese economy during the commodity boom. And obviously their politics and concerns about China have dramatically changed in the last few years. So in that sense, it's not a shock, but it is a surprise.
How much is this also down to the location of these bases in Australia? Because Australian locations are far less vulnerable to Chinese long-range weapons than existing US Pacific military bases. I'm thinking about the ones in Guam and Japan.
Guam. Yeah, that's probably it's an advantage and a disadvantage. They're either easier to defend, but a long way away. But it is a challenge. We're now, facing at least potentially Chinese with pretty impressive long-range strike capabilities. They've learned the lessons from sort of the American way of war and realize that the thing they can't do if war happens is let us control the sea lines, the lines to the conflict, the timing of the conflict. So in that sense, Australia is both convenient and safer, I suppose. Long way away, but at least bit easier to defend, less vulnerable.
Tell me more about what Australia has to gain from this, Greg, because Anthony Albanese, Labour Prime Minister of Australia, he's backed this. Is there fear of a dangerous China so compounded of late by events that they just feel that it's safer to enter this agreement with the United States?
I think so. That's certainly my impression that it is this, as I said, a really pretty big change from the days 15 years ago when Australia was prospering in the commodity boom and was basically kind of an appendage of China in some economic respects. So that's a big change. Obviously, they felt they've gone too far down that track, and now China's somewhat less attractive economically as it has its own bad patch, and then the world, for better or worse, has gotten sort of divided into, I think of it as kind of two clubs. There's one club around China and one club around the United States. They're not especially exclusive. It's not like the Cold War, but they're getting, in some ways, more and more solid. We saw the submarine affair, the Australians interested in getting submarines. That was kind of clumsy and not nice to France, but it did symbolize, I think, Australia turning over a new page in thinking about its strategic position and its strategic relationships.
Well, Greg, that's an intriguing point, because here we are at a point where in the last few weeks, the relationship between these nations, so specifically the one between China and the US, we've seen Henry Kissinger, 100 years old, meeting Xi Jinping in Beijing. We've seen the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, going over and meeting Chinese officials in Beijing too. I mean, on one hand, that suggests that China-US relations are improving. On the other hand, the United States is now going to send far more military and troops over to Australia and embed spies there. So you've got two different situations going on.
Yeah, no, the United States and China are really trying to do something that I think has not been done in recent memory, and that is recognize that they're intertangled economically, that they have to act together on some things like climate, but are going to be great competitors on lots of other issues. And that I think is the challenge. The problem from my perspective with Washington is it's sort of turned China into the enemy for everything, all bad things. And this combination of cooperation on really important issues, but competition on lots of other issues, that's a hard one to manage, I think. We usually think that you build cooperation by starting with easy things and move up to the harder ones. We're trying to cooperate on the most important issues, pandemics and global warming, while competing on lots of other issues. And that I think is something that is rare, maybe unheard of in recent history.
Craig, can I ask you about kind of the elephant in the room and the big question here? That of Taiwan, which Beijing believes is part of China and it should be reclaimed. What kind of timescale do you think the Chinese are looking at and actually attempting to reclaim Taiwan by force? Do you think this is, people have talked about it by 2050 when the Chinese army will be at its strongest? Some have said sooner. Well, is it inevitable that there will be an assault on Taiwan?
I don't think so. I mean, I do worry that Xi Jinping is a man in a hurry. He's trying hard to make China rich before it gets old. So his timetable is pretty short, and I think he would like to reintegrate Taiwan. But I think he also recognizes, and we've seen from all the war games that have been done lately, that any invasion of Taiwan would be difficult and would end up kind of ruining the prize. So I think in that sense, at least I hope, Xi Jinping is prudent enough to say, well, as long as we know that this is going to happen eventually, and if, from the American standpoint, we ought to try to avoid needlessly things like the Pelosi visit and the receiving of the Taiwanese president in the United States, things that sort of stick it in China's eye. But I think that it's in both sides' interest to be patient. I just hope Xi Jinping is prepared to be. It does seem to me that when he looks at the military calculation, he's got to say, that doesn't make any sense. I don't want to get involved in a guerrilla warfare that destroys Taiwan, destroys all the things we care about, all those chip manufacturers. So I hope and believe, I guess, that both sides will be relatively patient.
Because China's accused the US of turning Taiwan into an ammunition depot. This is after the White House announced this $345 million military aid package for Taipei last week. And at the same time, off the coast of Taiwan, there were 6 Chinese Navy ships in the waters off its shores, and these incursions into Taiwanese waters, these are happening more and more regularly by China, aren't they?
Yes, I think they are. I mean, they've been a feature for a long time, but they're more and more regular now. And this kind of minuet plays out over and over again every time. It's, according to at least American understanding of the agreements with China, we are allowed to provide armaments to Taiwan. But every time we do a package, that becomes an occasion for them to complain and do some show of force. So in that sense, it's a minuet, but a kind of dangerous one, because we're always worried that some war might happen by accident, not by calculation. And that is worrisome to me.
How important is Taiwan in global economic chains? I mean, you mentioned microchips there, which go, in everything from our phones to electric cars. But how much is its stability and its security key to global finance? Because we saw what happened with Russia and Ukraine, because so much grain is exported out of the Black Sea. We saw what happened to food prices, in part, not just from the bounce back from COVID, but in part due to the Ukraine war, what happened there. But the knock-on of potential conflict in Taiwan could also have a major impact on worldwide inflation because of how key microchips are in Taiwan and how big they are for the rest of the world.
No, absolutely. It's one of the great surprises, I think, of globalization, that Taiwan has ended up being such a prominent producer. It's a relatively little country. Now everybody is diversifying, and Taiwan chip makers are moving factories to the United States and other places, so there is diversification happening. But it would be if there were a major war that destroyed that capacity, it would be a major hit for the world economy.
Just before I let you go, Greg, I mentioned him before, but Henry Kissinger 100 years old. I was reading about that meeting that he had with President Xi Jinping in China over the week, and then you heard some of the, and you will have been on the receiving end of some of these this intelligence when you were working for President Obama. It's incredible, isn't it, that a man of his age is not just visiting President Xi Jinping, but actively engaged in discussions and then feeding them back to U.S. intelligence agencies about what he's found.
Yeah, no, it really is very impressive. His views on China, I think, are really important. He said even better than I just did a few minutes ago that the challenge that China and the United States face is really almost unparalleled, at least unparalleled in recent human history, and that is the great challenge, it seems to me, at least for the United States, for our times. And he's certainly central to it, and is still playing an active and interesting role.
Yeah, how he was welcomed by Xi Jinping, the words that he spoke about, and the warmth that he gave, it's very unlikely that he would give that out to another diplomat. So it was remarkable to watch.